do all this in 5 minutes, Ms. Carvel?
I will rush. I certainly will. You have the written thing, and the flow chart that I've given you is the same as the one I enlarged for you to see. I flew in from London because I wanted to be part of this hearing that I think is a very significant effort.
So I can give you a little bit longer than 5 minutes since you flew in from London.
But I think it's a significant effort in preserving our aspiring democracy, because what's going on in surrogates court, which is where my connection to the Office of Court Administration and the DDC and the other disciplinary committees comes from, is nothing less than a criminal enterprise. You don't have to take my word for it, because one of the lawyers that I hired actually wrote an article in the New York Law Journal, and I've attached that for you. Eve Markowitz, who I hired to help me recover money stolen by the controlling shareholders of Hudson Valley Bank, wrote an article in the New York Law Journal detailing all of the gross violations of ethics that went into railroading my aunt so that in her whole lifetime she received nothing of benefit after my uncle died. When in 1990 my uncle, the week before he died, said there was $250 million in the family. He called me and asked me to come back from China, where I was acting as a fraud investigator, to be able to help him discover where $100 million had gone missing. On the Saturday before his death, he had told people that he was going to fire the two employees, a lawyer and his secretary they thought were responsible. He was found dead on Sunday. And on Monday morning, the culprits, who were agents of Hudson Valley Bank that held the money and that has been the recipient of all of the money since 1990, they were in control of everything. Just recently, I've discovered that my uncle's death certificate was forged, that the information on it was falsified to avoid an autopsy, and I will be trying to exhume his body to see if he was murdered in order to set in motion this criminal enterprise that is a pattern in surrogates court. No efforts to bring these things before the Office of Court Administration have worked in any of the cases that I've investigated other than our own. Hudson Valley Bank paid surrogate Scarpino $100,000 during his election. Just prior to the trials in my uncle's estate, they paid surrogate Scarpino $200,000 as an alleged loan. And just prior to the trials in my aunt's estate, they paid surrogate Scarpino another $100,000.
These issues, did you raise them with the...
Raise them with the Office of Court Administration.
When you say Office of Court Administration?
The Judicial Commission on Judicial Conduct.
When did you do this? When was this?
It was probably, I discovered it in 2007, so it was probably 2007, 2008.
So what has happened since then?
They said they didn't find a problem with Scarpino not only receiving money from Hudson Valley Bank, but allowing Hudson Valley Bank's controlling shareholder to receive all of the assets from my uncle's estate, and to allow him to appear before Scarpino as a witness without ever disclosing that there were financial arrangements between Hudson Valley Bank and Judge Scarpino.
And you raised this to the Commission on Judicial Conduct?
Raised it to the Commission on Judicial Conduct. They asked for documentation. I gave them full documentation. They found absolutely nothing wrong with that.
But since Mrs. Tembekian is here, before this is over, I will raise that issue.
All right. I also, in the course of investigating, found out that the controlling shareholder of Hudson Valley Bank, William Griffin, was given control of all of my aunt's real estate, which consisted, part of it was 19 acres in Ardsley, New York, which is a very expensive area. Griffin was allowed to flip that property to himself through Hudson Valley Bank, through one of his former law partner's brothers. In other words, the property, Griffin signed the property over, and then the property came back to Griffin as Hudson Valley Bank. And the whole proceeding took place for $2 million on paper that never changed hands, and the property is worth $10 million or more. I brought that to the attention of Surrogate Scarpino, and Surrogate Scarpino again found there was no problem because of the dealing being done by William Griffin, who was responsible for paying Surrogate Scarpino at least $400,000. Part of the problem with the whole system, by the way, I also filed a complaint against Steve Markowitz for knowing about all of these violations. Eve Markowitz, who I hired on behalf of my aunt's estate, betrayed any representation for us on the promise that William Griffin would pay her $4 million, allow her to be paid $4 million in legal fees, which she has been paid, I understand. And when I filed the complaint with the Commission on Judicial Conduct on her lack of representation, her betrayal of the purposes for which she was hired, and also her complete knowledge of ethical violations by other attorneys that she refused, not only did she refuse to tell me about them, but she refused to take any action herself, which was her duty as a lawyer. It came back, the decision came back that her problems would be sorted out in a legal lawsuit. Well, there was no legal lawsuit pending between me and Eve Markowitz, and there was nothing, no venue for that to be handled at all. So whether they investigated or not, I don't know. She put in a response, and her response was this was going to be handled in litigation. But there was no litigation. Okay. There is
and that complaint that you put, was that in what?
That was the
first department?
For Manhattan. It was the first department. I put in a similar complaint with one of Eve Markowitz's fellow attorneys in Frank Strang, who didn't tell me that he was employed by the judge. He was also an attorney of mine, was supposed to represent me. He converted approximately $1 million that I paid him and then took another $1 million from the estate. Complaints were filed against him, and I was informed that he has a law partner, one of his law partners is on the commission in Westchester, and that nothing would be done. And the same answer came back on that thing, that it would be handled in litigation, but again, there was no litigation in which Frank Strang's ethics were part of the litigation. There was no, actually at that time, there was no litigation involving Frank Strang at all. The whole system, and I call it a criminal enterprise because the exact tactics being used are in the penal code, the New York State Penal Code: coercion, larceny, conspiracy. These are all being operated out of the court, out of the surrogate's court, and in particular Westchester. But I know it's happening in Manhattan, it's happening in Dutchess. And they're using a one-sided system of favoritism. My aunt and I, as fiduciaries, should have had equal access to indemnification as all the other fiduciaries. We were the only two fiduciaries denied indemnification because we were the only two working with law enforcement. Right. All the others were paid completely. As long as my aunt lived, she never received a penny from my uncle's estate. But Hudson Valley Bank controls $150 million of Carvel money that my aunt was the sole beneficiary of.
They still control it?
It's all been given to them. They've over the last 10 years by Surrogate Scarpino, all of the money in my uncle's estate and in my aunt's estate has been passed over to Hudson Valley Bank. Without notice to the named beneficiaries, without notice to the creditors, without court approval, assets have been disposed of that were supposed to be in constructive trust. None of these things have phased the Judicial Commission.
I think since we still have Mr. Debacle here, this is something that maybe I may want to look a little further into something like this. So if you have time, maybe before the end of today, maybe we can just, or my staff, just have a meeting with the members of the commission to see where some of these issues are.
I'd be glad to. I just wanted to point out one other problem with the system. Most times when you complain about a decision or a judge's actions, they'll tell you, well, you have the avenue of appeal. In surrogates court, the judges either don't render decisions, even though there's a 60-day rule. They may not render decisions for 2 years or more. They do not hold trials. If they do hold trials, Surrogate Emanuele didn't hold a trial for 10 years. My aunt's issues were not litigated at trial until 5 years after she was dead. You're denied trial by jury, or decisions are rendered by transcript, which cannot be appealed, or they're rendered in such a way that it's too late. The issue, the money, everything has already been gone by time the decision has been rendered. This is a pattern, and it's in more than one estate. And I congratulate you for recognizing there's a problem. I think part of the solution, if not the whole solution, is complete transparency and complete anonymity. No judge should be given one case for 20 years. No one court should have one case for 20 years. If you have, in our case, I'm dealing with surrogates court, if you have numerous proceedings, let everything go into Supreme Court, dispose of the surrogates courts, let everything be assigned by a blind rotating calendar of judges, let the proceedings be separated so that each proceeding is going to get a different judge and a different hearing, and there has to be something to ensure that money is not passed from one side to the other, or that one side alone is funded. There has to be an enforcement of the Constitution that all people have equal rights before the law. Thank you.
Ms. Carvel, thank you very much. The next witness, and I'm going to adhere to the 5-minute rule, Paul Altman. Ms. Altman, are you here?